without subtitle. So, are you ready? Yes? Okay. So, the history of the paranormal. Where have we been? Where are we going? What happens now? These are the questions that Scottie and I hope to answer for you in the next 2 hours or so. Kidding. Now, when Scottie and I look back at our history, we wanted to begin by finding those very first records that we as human beings might create and see what we could find in those in terms of the paranormal. And that came to us in the form of cave paintings. Next slide, please. When we researched the subject of cave paintings, this is what we found. We found that the earliest ones were created about 35,000 years ago. We discovered what seemed to show a very different and dualistic experience among the people who created them. On one hand, there was the men of the tribe who painted images that were interesting to them, and they like to paint interesting images of macho male guy stuff. Next slide. Hunting large beasts, for example. They also like to paint lots of naked cave women. I left that slide out. But if you actually Google the subject, it's just typical of what you find in most of the searches of cave paintings. On the other side of the coin, or the cave, if you will, there were the women of the tribe. And they seem to have more interest in being connected and resonating with things like spirit and energy and the ethereal. Next slide. When we look at women of the tribe, we see beautiful representations of spirit. They left behind what is now called hand stenciling. And we see magnificent interwoven patterns of aura or energy that are surrounding the fingers and the hands. These images are from a place known as the Cave of the Hands in Argentina. And like our modern Curlian photography, we see that the energy radiating out from the body. So they seem to be more connected and attuned to spirit. They also left behind, next slide. There's another image of it. They also left behind the beautiful painted examples of their gods and their deities, the ghosts and the spirits that they believed in, also surrounded by the same auras, halos and spirit-type energy. Next slide. They were clearly conscious.
Hello.
There we go. All right. So they were clearly conscious of the spirit energy that radiated outward. And it was beautifully recreated in these. I love the eyes in these photographs, these otherworldly type beings that they represented. Now, also while searching for examples of cave paintings, we came across definite proof that the early cave people actually investigated the paranormal. I think this next slide speaks for itself. There you can see red. Scottie.
As we continue along our journey, the next great period of recorded history is most certainly with the ancient Egyptians. Next slide. Around the time of 2600 BC, the Great Pyramids of Gaza were built. Magnificent structures that were created for no other reason than to prepare them for the afterlife that awaited them. The Egyptians were so fascinated in the afterlife that they spent their entire physical lives getting ready to make the transition. Next slide. In the Great Pyramids, the pharaohs' bodies were carefully embalmed, wrapped, and preserved for the journey to the afterlife.
You want me to do this?
That makes it easier.
There we go.
Archaeologists discovered vessels full of food and drink, alcohol, and honey that were preserved in their tombs. And there was also a variety of items, other items to sustain their energy for the trip. They sacrificed and buried servants, pets, and slaves along with them to accompany and assist them on their journey, and even provided boats and other means of transportation, supernatural transportation for them. Next slide. It didn't matter if you were rich or poor, royal or common. We see evidence that they enthusiastically believed life went on after physical death.
Yeah. Now our next look through the veil of time here focuses on the topic of world religions. And what does the Bible and other sacred texts have to say about the topic of ghosts and spirits? We wanted to look into that as well. Within the major religions, there's pretty unanimous current of deep distrust for spirits and their communications as well. Some believe that ghosts and spirits truly did exist. Others, not so much. Spirits are often viewed as fallible. motivated by selfish ends and liable to mislead those who rely on them for guidance. Furthermore, the spiritual world is also populated not only by ghosts, but by evil spirits, demons, fallen angels, and the big guy, Satan himself. So let's see what some of the great religions of the world had to say about the topic. This first one is from John, chapter 4, verse 1. Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see if they are of God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. A little cautionary note there. Let's see, in the world of Hinduism, men of ignorance worship spirits and ghosts. What does Confucius say? Confucius don't say much. Confucius never discussed abnormal phenomena, physical exploits, disorderly conduct, or spiritual beings. And there's a beautiful line from Buddhism. To maintain the existence of a ghost only brings about mischief. To understand, and you have to understand what he's saying there, to maintain the existence of a ghost. To understand the non-existence of a ghost is the way of the Buddha. To know that ghosts in reality are one is the way to liberation. And knowing that ghosts are all one's parents is the right understanding. But realizing that the ghost itself is self-mind is glory supreme. Very interesting words that come from our sacred text and our religions around the world. So let's move on. Now, Scottie Burns here is an actual witch hunter herself.
Wait, no.
All right, I'm sorry. She's
Going
a
off
witch
script
killer.
here.
No. I'm a witch sympathizer, witch...
Maybe.
Okay, well, we'll see. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay. All right. We move forward to the next significant era in our timeline called the Dark Times. The year was 1692, and certain villages and communities in the northeastern coastal regions of the United States usually included one or two members of the community who were labeled, well, let's just say odd. These people were much like their modern day counterparts. They were herbalists who used herbs and natural flowers, fruits, and other vegetation for not only medicinal, but spiritual healing as well. They were psychics and empaths, intuitives and sensitives, people who had the ability to look beyond the physical realm and could experience and interact with the world differently from others. Authorities of the towns who didn't understand these abilities reacted with fear and hatred and accused them of witchcraft. Authorities were mostly men, accused were mostly women. Generally known as the Salem witch trials, the hearings were actually conducted in several towns along the coast. The tortures that they were subjected to usually resulted in horrible death for those so accused. The court's test to see if you're a witch was simple, really. They tied you to a rock or chair and threw you in the river. If you died, you weren't a witch. This dark period in our history was a literal witch hunt brought on by fear, mass hysteria, religious extremism, and overall stupidity. And then things got even weirder. What we used to fear and destroy, witchcraft, we gave it a different name, and now we embraced it and welcomed it. The political and religious winds began a-changing, and people were suddenly fascinated by all things that went bump in the night. It was the Victorian era, and it ushered in with it a new age of spiritualism.
Absolutely. Now, the catalysts of this were some of the great writers of the day, people like Edgar Allan Poe, Charles Dickens, and those that wrote dark novels and were chock full of horror, blood, guts, eyeballs, monsters, elves, fairies, ghosts, you name it. Grimm's Fairy Tales was the hit of the day at that point, conjuring up lots of images of different dark creatures and things that lived in the woods, that kind of thing. People were fascinated by that, and they wanted more. And what people want, they get. Enter, ladies and gentlemen, the Fox Sisters.
The Fox Sisters were widely recognized spirit mediums and communicators. In the mid-1800s, the sisters began to report strange rapping sounds in their room at night. The parents heard it as well, and soon the rappings would be able to answer questions in the form of yes or no. That from tappings from on the floors, under tables, and it would also mimic the snaps of fingers from someone in the room. And at the time, the Fox Sisters enjoyed great success in their as spirit communicators. One of the sisters became the manager, the oldest sister, and they garnered huge audiences in New York and places like Boston. Others soon began to imitate the sisters. and the age of the seance was born. A typical seance would be conducted in a darkened room with everyone joining hands to prevent any possible trickery. The lights were dimmed or extinguished, and soon knocking sounds and rapping were heard about the room. People would have their hair pulled or their faces touched, even though everyone's hands were accounted for because they were on the table. The medium conducting the seance would sometimes spew forth ectoplasm, a cotton-like substance that claimed to be spirit residue. The very table that they were seated at began to move and levitate in the air. This is called table tipping. It was also very popular. Voices could be manifest and heard whispering through the use of spirit trumpets. And eventually, the grand finale itself, the manifestation of a fully formed apparition. Holy smokes. Is it a ghost or is it? What you were looking at is an actual photograph taken during a seance in the late 1800s. In an attempt to determine if the figure seen in the photo is an actual apparition or in fact a clever hoax. Tim and I ran the photo through a series of photographic diagnostic programs. First, we isolated and zoomed in on the figure itself. We then noticed distinct facial features within the cloth fabric. So we applied high definition filtering to the facial features. After removing the UV filtering, latte, layering, bullshit, whatever, we discovered this.
Now, the Victorian era. I gotta get rid of that. I just can't look at that. Love you, Tammy. The Victorian era was a pivotal time in the history of the paranormal because for the first time we began to see people emerging who would investigate and eventually start to challenge the claims that they were being told by the people who were doing this. Now, the early scientists and the academics of the day were pretty easily fooled by them, but there was one man whose special training gave him the ability to really look into this with authority and expose the frauds and people that were around the world. And we can probably call him the first original Ghostbuster. His name was Harry Houdini. Now, of course, everybody knows who the famous Houdini was, but not so many of us are familiar of an amazing story about a friendship between this man and this guy, Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, Doyle is most famous for his fictional stories of Sherlock Holmes. You may have heard of that guy. My kid loves that series on TV. Doyle is most famous for his fictional stories of the detective. Now, seen together here, the two men, they first met and they became friends about 1920. Arthur Conan Doyle embraced football. He loved fairies. He believed in ghosts, and he also loved a good argument. By this time, he was convinced of the existence of what was known as the Cottingley fairies at the time. And this is a photograph of that. During his lifetime, he spent personally over $1 million of his own money promoting this whole idea of fairies. His fascination with the afterlife, Doyle, all things paranormal, was usually at the forefront of his attention for pretty good reason. His wife, Lady Doyle, claimed to be a medium and a spirit communicator. And if you're married, well, you know how that goes. He fully believed in the authenticity of his wife's ventures there. Houdini, not so much. Now, Houdini had exposed several frauds back in the day. He was able to duplicate their feats, often better than the people who were doing it. Houdini and Arthur Conan Doyle became very good friends. They often vacationed together. You can see Doyle there. You can see Houdini's wife. Houdini always looks so intense in all of these photographs of him. Man, he must have practiced that.
He originally had the Rob face.
The Rob Dimmer's face. There it is. So they often vacation together, and they would discuss and have great conversations, and they would send letters back and forth across the ocean as well. Doyle lived in London about the subject. Finally, in an effort to convince Arthur Conan Doyle that paranormal stuff wasn't real, Houdini faked a great trick. He brought Arthur Conan Doyle in and he said, we're going to do this amazing thing. I want you to take this piece of paper, write something on it, go outside, write something on it, seal it in an envelope, bring it back in. When he came back in, there was a slate there and he had a cork-covered ball and it was covered with chalk. The ball began to roll around on the slate, and it wrote out exactly what Arthur Conan Doyle had said. He said, "Oh my God, you're paranormal. You're a witch. You can do this too." He says, "No, it's a trick, dude. Really, it's a trick." And Conan Doyle was not so convinced of that. Finally, Arthur Conan Doyle passed away in 1936, and there was a huge seance that was held in the Royal Albert Hall. And they lined up chairs, and all of them were filled with his family, his friends, his wife, and there was one chair that was left open for him. And he didn't appear. Imagine that. But there were people who were in the audience who said that they felt his presence. Houdini passed away actually in 1930, and there were a series for 10 years. There was a series of seances where his wife would come in and hold a seance and wait for you. You guys may be familiar with the story, the secret code that Houdini had given her. And the last one was held on the top of the Knickerbocker Hotel there. And they waited, and they waited, and guess what? Nothing happened. So, let me get caught up here. This photograph is of Arthur Conan Doyle as well, and this expresses the next stop on our timeline, spirit photography. Now, this was taken, it's what's known as a gelatin silver photograph, and it's from the Bartow collection in the British Library of London. Several paranormal investigators of the day had their pictures taken in this fashion, usually by one particular controversial spiritual photographer. His name was William Hope. Now, this photograph was taken by Hope as well, of the famous paranormal investigator Harry Price. Arthur Conan Doyle and Harry Price were both members of a very prestigious club with a really creative name. It was called, you ready? The Ghost Club. And they were the first official paranormal membership group. They were founded in 1862. But what's worth noting here is that for the first time, paranormal investigators began to use technology to investigate paranormal phenomena. They were using a camera to document ghosts and spirits. Now, the problem is that investigators didn't know the equipment. They weren't familiar with it. It was very expensive. You had to be pretty smart to use it. And so they relied on the cameramen themselves to produce the images, and therefore kind of, screwed up the experiment, so to speak. Somebody else was operating the device. Now, EVP technology would come in later in the 1940s, 1941. Audio devices, cameras became cheaper, and eventually investigators could buy the devices, and they began taking pictures and recordings for themselves. Here's a couple of my favorites that I pulled out of my little library. This one is the famous Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. The first sighting there in Raynham Hall was in 1835, and they called her the Brown Lady because there was color. You could see her dress, and people reported it. Several sightings throughout that time. In 1936, a gentleman named Captain Provan and his assistant were shooting an article, or shooting footage, film, for an article in a Country Life magazine. They had taken the first shot. He was setting up for the second shot. He was underneath the big cape that they wear, and the assistant saw this image floating down the stairs. He shot the flash, everything, the timing was perfect, and they got this photograph and captured the image that you see. Now, there are some people who say that there is a double exposure, a possibility here, but if you look at the negative, there's no tampering with it whatsoever. This is another one. I love this. This was shot on May 12, 1950. This is the interior of the White House during the Truman administration when they were doing a renovation of the entire house. It was shot by a Park Service employee named Abby Rowe. And you can see the guy down here in the bottom in the dumpster, or the dump truck and the bulldozer area there. And they completely gutted the inside of the White House. What had happened was that the piano had actually fallen through the second floor and the leg was sticking out the bottom. They did an assessment and said, got to fix this, and this is how they did it. During the renovation, you may see in the back here some little guys standing around. There's three guys right there. We're going to zoom in on that particular area there. And you may see an unusual figure right here. This is said to be the image of possibly a Civil War soldier who may have been interested in what was going on. And then you can see him back in there as well. Just an interesting photograph. This is a unique, interesting little image. This was created by or not created, but taken by Tom Halstead, and it was used in a movie that the Booth brothers did about a place called Zombie Road. And it's hard to see. This is actually shot during the daytime. That's the sun back there shining through the trees, and because of that, the exposure was dark. And he shot a picture of the river and the trees behind it. It was a beautiful image. And when he developed that and looked at it, you could see the images of people standing in the trees. Another photograph, now we're getting into something I'm a little familiar with. How many of you have heard of the Amityville Horror? This is a gentleman named Steve Petropoulos. He's here. In March 6, 1976, him along with Martin Scott and the camera crew that you can see here went into the Amityville house with Ed and Lorraine Warren. There was about 20 people there that night. And they did what they called the psychic slumber party. Laura DeDeo gave it the name of. And they're here in the Amityville house. They're getting ready to do a tour with the cameras for a live shoot that was going to happen that night. So they're getting ready to go. What I want you to notice here is this particular camera that you see here. Now on it, when it's up on the shoulder here, there's two things you need to look at. One is this pistol grip right here, which is held with the right hand, and the left hand grabs the lens here to use to do the focus. And this is how they move through the house. By the way, let me go back. This gentleman, during that seance, as he started to go up the stairway to the second floor, he said, there's a room in this house that is full of mirrors. And he had never been in the house before, but he had gotten that picture, that image. And sure enough, when they got up to the second floor, Ronald DeFeo Sr.'s bedroom was covered with the old 70s mirrored tiles. He was kind of a kinky guy, I think, maybe, I don't know. But he had those in his room. As they went up and they started to reach the second story landing, this gentleman's face went from red to completely white. He experienced heart palpitations. He said, I think I'm having a heart attack. They had to bring him back down to the first floor, and he sat down. After a few minutes, he was able to continue on. So something was going on here. Meanwhile, upstairs was this camera. This was set up on the second floor landing by a gentleman named Gene Campbell. Gene Campbell was the developer who worked at the Photomat where Ed and Lorraine Warren developed their film. And they would always bring in these crazy images. And he said, can I go on a ghost hunt with you guys one time? I gotta try this. You guys bring in these crazy pictures. So they allowed him to come in. He built a special camera, and this is it. He set it up on a tripod, on a timer, and every 30, 60 seconds or so, it would just set off a flash and snap a photo on the second floor of the Amityville house. So this is one of those photos. You can see the landing there, nothing unusual going on. And every 60 seconds or so, it would snap a photo. Well, when the cameramen and they were doing their live shot, they got up to the top. Here's the image that it shot. You see Marvin Scott on the right-hand side, the cameraman in the middle. There's the lighting guy, and Laura DeDeo, who is the news reporter for the same station. There's something interesting going on here. I've lightened up this photo a little bit so that you can see behind it. You can clearly see the doors that were there before and the line going across. This is as bright as I could get it. I've looked at this a million times through all sorts of filtering. I guarantee you there's nobody standing behind them. And yet, here in this camera image, you see a third hand holding onto the camera. Unusual. Whose is it? The lighting guy? No. His hand is here. There's his hands. There's his too. So we have no idea where that third hand came from. Just an unusual picture that happened there. Another photo that was captured that's a little bit more famous is this one. And I brought this in because I had like really the only cool high definition picture of it. George gave it to me personally. And that's the Ghosty Boy. You may see him peering out from the room right over here. Just another unusual photograph that happened there. And we're going to zoom in and take a look at that and what that actually is. Sorry. You may remember the white rocking chair that we heard about in the Amityville. That's somebody actually sitting on the white rocking chair. This is Missy's room. You can see the chair seat right there. And this person sitting, leaning out. Here you can see their forearm a little bit. And you can see the unusual white eyes. The white eyes are actually glasses that someone is wearing as they're leaning out of the room. And I've often thought to myself that that's probably a female person. The problem is nobody could identify that person. That person didn't exist in in the party that was there that night. When they showed this photograph to Missy, the little girl who used to live there, she said, that was Jody. That's the little boy that I used to play with in the house. So there's some photographs for you. And let's move on. So now, where are we? Up to the modern day. Now, I'm going to let Scottie take care of this portion of our program because I have been very critical of some of the television shows and things that are out there, and that's not our intent here. Our intent is to kind of lay out a timeline of the things that have happened. I can tell you that during this time period was one of the most exciting, intense periods in the history of paranormal phenomenon as far as people who are fascinated by this subject. One of the things that happens for investigators who have been doing this for a long time is you see a cycle that occurs. And for about 5 years, you get sightings with Tim White, you get In Search Of with Leonard Nimoy, those types of shows come and go, and then it fades out. This time, it hasn't gone away. And there's more people that come to these things time and time again, and it's because of people like Jason and Grant. Scott.
Yeah, well, like I said, Tim and I, we've been doing this for a long time. And I can remember when we were younger, when I was younger, I used to tell people what I did, and they just look at me like I was absolutely out of my mind. You know, it's like, you know, yeah, I go into places that have, you know, hauntings going on, and I go in and try, and I can remember going to Gettysburg in 1976 with a big old reel-to-reel and a you know, a Brownie camera. And I mean, it used to be very, very, you were put off. You were put in a different category of people.
Which, yeah, people would look at you like that.
And you know, but they didn't believe that you'd go into like a cemetery at night or whatever. And you did this voluntarily. But as time goes on, like I said, Tim's right. It does go in cycles. And in 2004, when Ghost Hunters came on TV, it actually launched a new era of paranormal investigation. Really, Tim? Really, Tim? Really, Tim? I mean, now you're going too far. No. Really?
Current state of our affairs in paranormal investigation. Listen, these shows serve a purpose. One, they've gotten the majority of people who are in this room here. So, and they have also spread the word out there that maybe this stuff is real. But you have to realize also, there was a conversation that happened last night. I was watching you guys on YouTube last night, and there was a conversation that occurred about entertainment versus paranormal investigation. There's room for everyone in this field. And what you see here are people who are not necessarily being represented by a camera for who they really are. Jason and Grant, I know them. I know just about everybody that's up on that picture there. I've interviewed them. I spent hours talking with them. They're real, genuine people who have an interest in paranormal phenomenon. Jason and Grant are known for going in a house and going, yep, it's haunted. Thanks, see ya, bye. You don't get to see the work that they do where they help the clients. So with that said, where do we go from here? I'm not sure. There we go. Oh. And our final slide, the future. What does the future hold for paranormal phenomena? Well, I'm looking at it right now. I'm seeing lots of hearts and lots of connections that are being made here in search of the right template. What do we do from here? Where do we go? Well, I'd like to offer you a suggestion. We have many people who are now accredited who are interested in this topic. And it didn't used to be that way. You can think of names throughout history like Thelma Moss with UCLA Berkeley, who ran the parapsychological bullshit, whatever institute that was there. You have professors like Barry Taff, a brilliant parapsychologist who is studying and works in the field of ghosts and hauntings. People like Stanton Friedman with the MUFON folks, a nuclear physicist who works in the area of UFO phenomena. The professors and the academic scholars are out there, and we need to go to them and say, as a group, maybe we don't understand what scientific theory is or how to do it. We're really good with EMF detectors, but we don't know how to interpret the data that we're getting. What can you give us as a community What templates can you provide to us that will teach us the right way? What's the data you need? Show us how to do this, damn it. And they will. They will provide that for you. They're out there and they're available. One of the problems is they don't get invited to conferences like this because they're not that interesting. So
They're scientists. They're very dry.
right. If you ever watched an interview with Barry Taff, oh, so my prayer for the spiritual and the scientific and the paranormal community is this. These are great people and they're fascinating, amazing people. You have some of them here at this conference and they're great. Talk to them, you'll see their passion and you'll see their heart and you'll see them shine for who they really are. But also there comes a place where we need to remember the people like Thelma Moss and Susan Blackwood, who teaches in memetics, an amazing parapsychologist, bullshit, whatever, person who works in this. I can never say that word.
I know. Parapsychologist.
Yeah, that. All right. These are the people that we need to lift up and say, this is who we choose to represent us in the paranormal field. These are the folks that we need to model and look at the evidence and the things that they need so that we can advance the cause. And that's my thought. So with that, final comments?
Final comments, where we're going.
I'm going to lunch. Are y'all ready?
I thought you were really gonna get into it and really maybe take some people off.
I'm not.
I promised them that, Tim.
Well,
I'm just saying,
no.
Okay.
Not going to happen. So I have turned a new leaf. So with
It
that
was
said,
good. It was really good. I'll just say that.
Yeah. With that said, questions from anyone? Now's your shot. Unless you want to go to lunch. Or who's next, actually?
All right, it's 10:35. We still got.
A wonderful light in the paranormal community. Teddy Schuyler is with us. So with that, we thank you. We appreciate you, and we'll be here all day.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.